Welcome to the English Language Institute of Singapore's podcast series, Windows on Expertise. In this series, we feature speakers and experts with classroom and research experience in literacy development, English language teaching, learning, and assessment. This episode focuses on metacognition, one of the pedagogical emphases of the English Language Syllabus 2020. I'm Cedric, and with me are my guests, Dr. Sally Ann Jones, Ms. Renee Yuanna Sulaiman, and Mr. Andre Wong. Welcome. Sally is a senior lecturer in the English Language and Literature Department of the National Institute of Education, Nanyang Technological University. She's a former teacher of English Language and Literature and has experience teaching in various countries, including Singapore. Andre teaches English Language and Literature in Pasir's Crest Secondary School, and Renee is a senior teacher of English Language at Punggol Primary School. Both Renee and Andre have been inquiring into how to enact metacognition in their English language classrooms. I'd like to begin our conversation by inviting all of us to recall an incident when your metacognition saved your day. Andre, let's begin with you.
Okay, thank you, Cedric. So one incident that I recall where metacognition saved the day is actually my first ever tennis lesson about 2 to 3 years ago. So I remember I was trying to learn how to do a forehand. And at that point, I got very frustrated because I had only played badminton up to then. So the frustration really kicked in. I was thinking to myself, maybe this just isn't my sport. And I felt that when metacognition kicked in was when I noticed myself getting frustrated. And then I had to regulate those emotions and tell myself that, hey, I'm here to learn a new sport. There's really no pressure. And then I decided that, I should enjoy this experience. So I recalled my previous learning experiences to really think about how I can do the forehand a little bit better. And I realized that actually worked. So at that point of time, I wasn't aware that I was being metacognitive. But now when I think about that experience again, I realize actually that is a very valuable thought process to be able to help me whenever I try something new.
Renee, what about you?
Well, not in sports, but for me, I'm a language enthusiast and I like to learn languages. I start off very excited and then I hit a plateau and then I get frustrated. So that frustrated feeling, I resonate with that. Whenever I get frustrated, I realize I need to step back. I need to think about what's not working, why I'm getting frustrated, how this language might be different from the other languages that I have been learning, and then choose what I need to do to rejuvenate my study process. And I think that's helped me with quite a number of my languages that I'm currently picking up.
Sally?
Well, I'm completely the opposite, really, in that as a young person growing up, going through school, I was unaware of myself. I was unaware of what was going on around me. And it was only later as a young adult, in fact, when I started teaching, that I became more metacognitively aware. So I could have really benefited from some metacognitive instruction in school. And so that really explains my interest in metacognition today.
So it's evident from all your recounts that metacognition had a role to play, sometimes critical, in your daily experiences as well as in learning. So Sally, could you maybe please explain briefly to us what is involved in metacognition?
Okay, I think if you think about the examples that Renee and Andre have given, metacognition is a bit more than thinking about thinking. So it's our knowledge and the skills we use in application about ourselves, the tasks we are given or the tasks we meet, and the strategies we employ, as well as our experiences or previous experiences of metacognition. And if you think about it, this is also very much related to self-directedness, which is one of the 21st century competencies. And so when we think about metacognition, the eventual aim is that self-directed, independent attitude to learning in school, but also learning in life.
Yeah, a good point about metacognition being thinking about our own thinking and about developing self-directedness. So the key question for our conversation today is what is the place of metacognition in the English language classroom? Right. So maybe Sally, if you could tell us why you have emphasized metacognition in your research and in teacher education.
I think the main driver is in my last research project about metacognition, I discovered that we don't actually have a subject-specific definition. So this really complicates our teaching, because if we have no definition, it's very difficult then to craft our learning outcomes and be directed and intentional. And so what I found is there are 3 aspects of awareness in English language. One is metacognition, and this is the one we're talking about in the syllabus and so on. And the other one is metalinguistic awareness, so that's a precise knowledge of language. And the other one is multilingual awareness, and that is how knowledge of other languages in relation to English. So that's one reason why I emphasize it. Another reason is that metacognition is deeply implicated in transferring learning. And if we want to have a transfer of learning across from one context to a completely fresh context, we need that deep processing that awareness brings. If we just use drill and practice, we'll get a superficial transfer, but not one that is to a new context. So I think that idea of transfer is one of the main goals of education, in that we want children to leave school able to do that. And my final point is really to do with our educational context, our multilingual environment. Because we have children and young people in school, some of whom come from English-dominant homes and some of whom come from mother tongue-dominant homes. So if I'm in an English-dominant home, I have huge exposure to the English language at home, and I can really acquire it with less conscious awareness. But if I'm in a dominant mother tongue speaking home, then I can compensate for that so-called advantage from being in an English dominant home by using metacognitive strategies and metalinguistic strategies. So I can be a little bit more self-conscious and I can really learn the language. So I think those are mainly the reasons why I do emphasize it.
And you made a good point that metacognition is especially important in a multilingual context, especially for students who do not have English as the dominant language, both at home and perhaps in the interaction with their friends and classmates. Andre?
Well, for me, at one point I was reflecting on the way I teach writing to my English, my secondary school students, and I realized that actually it was very end product driven. What I mean by that is, I give students a task to complete, and then the only feedback that they get would be from the teacher, giving them either a grade or written assessment, written feedback, assessing how well they have done. But I realized that actually this limits students in 2 different ways. Firstly, for me, I feel that because of what Sally mentioned about having to transfer certain skills, they are very restricted because they're not able to transfer what they've learned from one type of text to another type of text. So that's one. The other is also that I realized that writing is a process which requires students to go back and forth between different phases of writing. So from pre-writing to the drafting to reviewing, actually students need the ability to be able to move back and forth between those stages themselves. So I found that actually metacognition would be very useful, in fact necessary, if you want to empower students to be able to do that.
Renee?
Yeah, I think Andre has mentioned task-to-task transference. For me, there are 2 types of transference that I'm thinking about, which are the reasons why I want to emphasize metacognition. One is the necessity of transferring learning between subjects. So as English language teachers, we're not just teaching English for the sake of learning English, but also for the ability to learn other things. So it's not just about what they're learning, but how they're learning as well. So that's important. And the other is that I've had the luxury of teaching children from nursery 1 to secondary 3, and having that experience has made me see the bigger picture, and it has taught me that it's important to help the students across all the different stages of their learning. So I can't just be a primary 6 teacher and be preparing the students for the PSLE. I need to understand where they're coming from, what they have come up to where I am with them at this point and where they're going. So I need to be able to equip them with those metacognitive strategies that help them to learn for life, not just for the stage that they're at the moment.
So it all points to the importance of focusing our attention on learning and not on completing various tasks. So Sally, in your research that you have been engaged in or you've been familiar with, in what ways would an English language classroom that emphasizes metacognition be different from one that does not?
Okay, I think that classroom would be different in that the teacher would be key. In all the research that I've conducted, the teacher is the most important factor as to how and whether meta-awareness is implicated in the classroom. So I think that that's one very important difference. And the teacher would be intentionally dealing with metacognition. The teacher would, in order to do that, be visibly talking about thinking. So using a language of thinking, such as explain, compare, tell me how you did that, etc. So the two would be developing together. Language would be developing alongside thinking. And we know that when that happens, it's ideal for developing awareness and even thinking itself. In this classroom also, there would not be a very smoothly implemented, proceduralized toing and froing. I think that there would be some challenges because the teacher would be pressing for thinking, and there would also be students able to articulate their struggles in learning. And when the teacher met those struggles, the teacher would then respond with a reasoned explanation rather than reverting back to a familiar procedure. So I think a classroom which emphasised metacognition or meta-awareness would have those aspects. Yeah.
As she's speaking, I'm checking off boxes, to see whether or not I meet Sally's expectations of a classroom.
We're all learning.
Yeah.
Andre, what does a classroom that emphasizes metacognition look like and sound like in the secondary school context?
Yes, actually, I would like to build on what Sally has mentioned about the student being able to articulate some of the struggles that they have in learning, and then the teacher responding to that. So for me, in terms of learning experiences, I think an EL classroom with metacognition would be one that emphasizes or has many activities that revolve around dialogue. So an interaction between either between students or between the teacher and the students. So for me, I feel that it's important that students are able to first decide what approach they want to take to tasks, be able to articulate that, and then also be able to rationalize and tell the teacher or tell their classmates the reason for making those decisions. Okay, so in terms of assessment for learning, I feel that having students upkeep a journal is actually very useful. So personally, I also do this in my EL and lit classrooms where students frequently perform quick writes in class before, during, and after tasks. And I feel that that gives me the opportunity to insert prompts that encourage metacognition. And of course, regarding learner outcomes, I believe that such an emphasis on metacognition actually does hit some of our learning objectives or learning outcomes in the EL syllabus, where we want students to be able to monitor, adjust, reflect on, and also critique their own work.
Renee, what does it look like in the primary classroom context?
I think Andre has mentioned journaling, which is an example of a visible thinking routine. So visible thinking routines, I think, need to intentionally be put into the classroom. In the primary school context, you are building the foundation of how they become more meta-aware. So these kind of routines actually not just help us to intentionally bring these kind of discussions to the classroom, but also help teachers to understand how the students are using analysing, their thought processes, and therefore be able to assess whether the students are really doing it effectively. Whether is there a way that we can help students be more metacognitive in that sense, through looking at what they have written or what they are articulating. So I think there's a lot of language of talking about how you think, what you're thinking, and why you're thinking that way. So I think there's a lot of building of those thought processes in the classroom.
Yeah. So it's important not to stop at the making thinking visible or audible, but to have conversations around what you have noticed about the way you are going about thinking and doing your, performing a task, and whether or not there's a way to make it more effective and improve on the process. So what then, is the role of the English language teacher in this enterprise? Maybe Andre, we start with you.
Okay. So I personally feel that teachers must play the role of inquirers in the classroom, so as to model that thought process of thinking about how they themselves approach tasks, so that students will be able to mimic that as well. So sometimes what I do in the classroom, as I am, for example, breaking down a situational writing task for students, I would actually look at the question paper, right, and even physically model for them how I am thinking about the task and asking myself, what does this task actually require me to do? What are the strategies that I have to approach this task effectively? So I think the teacher's role in the classroom, in the metacognitive classroom, is actually very important in modeling that for students.
Sally, your thoughts?
Well, just picking up from what Andre has said, I see that really one of the essence of what you're saying is that you're slowing down the thinking process. So you're slowing it down, and therefore allowing everybody to focus on the process, and as you said before, not to focus on the product. So I think that's very important. And the point about the teacher himself or herself being meta-aware is important for the intentionality of the teaching. So I see the role of the teacher is to guide rather than over-control by scaffolding to a predetermined outcome, which could be a product, or it might also be a kind of like right way of doing metacognition.
And overall to build a culture of thinking and learning, and rather than on completing tasks. So finally, what can our English language teachers and teacher leaders, and including maybe key personnel, do to begin to build that culture of metacognition in our classrooms, in our English language classrooms? Maybe Andre, will begin with you again.
Right, thank you. So, because I personally feel also that metacognition, the understanding of what exactly it means or what exactly it is, can sometimes be a little bit elusive. For me, I also took about 2 years to come to an understanding of what I can bring to the classroom. So I would say start small and identify individual tasks within units to build in strategies that can help students be more metacognitively aware. Actually, one very structured way to go about doing this would be referring again to the clear pedagogical framework and identifying which parts of your task are for contextualizing learning for students, which parts are for learning and exploring, and zooming into those specific parts and think about what kind of strategies you can use to encourage students to be more metacognitive.
Yeah, I think that kind of structured and starting small approach is really quite necessary, because as we talk about the classroom culture, we also have to talk about the teaching culture in the school. And teachers, when they hear things like slow down, or they hear things like, let go of your control, they're going to go like, no, that's not going to happen. It's quite frightening, I think, for a teacher to think about having to slow down or having to model or having to let go and have students articulate their thoughts with more freedom, So I think there's a lot of need for key personnel and for teacher leaders to help teachers through the process by engaging in professional conversations with them, like this one, about metacognition and what it means in the English classroom. I think the teachers also need a lot of guidance in terms of how does this actually look like in the classroom? Can I do this in a primary 1 classroom where children are so young? Are they able to do this? I think there's a lot of modeling by teacher leaders that needs to happen as well. So, we need to open up our classrooms. We need to have a more open culture of being able to get feedback from one another and learn from one another to do this well.
Thank you, Renee. Sally, you may want to have the last word here.
I do. Thank you. I also want to go back a little bit to a point you made, Renee, about language. So you were talking about modelling and you were talking about language. And I think why teachers might feel a little insecure is that we do have in the syllabus that the idea of metacognition, so the idea of the structure. So when we're putting it into a writing activity, we can, on a kind of big picture, macro level, teach the planning, the revising and so on. We've almost got that in place. But I think when it comes down to that middle level of linguistic awareness, when it comes down to choosing the right word, choosing the right structure for impact and effect, then I think that's where we need to perhaps help teachers along. So we're kind of refocusing on those other aspects of awareness specific to English language, metalinguistic and multilingual. So that's one thing I wanted to add. And then coming back to your question about building a practice of meta awareness within the school, I totally agree that it will be a little disconcerting perhaps at the beginning, but we must educate ourselves. And as you say, this is one way of doing it. We also need to be aware that it's a developing field and therefore there's not going to be any kind of easy answers. We are going to discover them in our classrooms as English teachers. So I think that should build our confidence a bit. And also we should remember that nowadays we have plenty of very sophisticated research techniques that give us pictures of the brain that help us learn more and more about metacognition. So that's one idea, educate ourselves. And another one is, allied to that, conduct research. So we can have research projects in NIE, in MOE, Ellis and so on. But really importantly, we need to have those small scale ones, those small investigations into our own classroom practice, applying all these things that you've been talking about, the AFL, the dialogue and so on, and seeing which of these directions are very helpful for which pupils and students, because every one of them is kind of diverse and unique. And I think that's where metacognitive awareness, metalinguistic awareness, and multilingual awareness can come in.
So all this points to how we need to maybe redirect our attention to as Andre has said, the English language teacher as an inquirer in the classroom, and having that being very visible even to our students, we can see that we are thinking, we are inquiring into how to think better, how to learn better. And there we'll have to leave it. But we hope that this podcast episode would spark conversations in your schools with your colleagues and about how we can emphasize metacognition in our English language classrooms. Thank you very much, Renee, Sally, and Andre, for joining me in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.